Hey guys, we are coming at you live. My name is Kyle Jaracz. I'm the Education Director for the Academy of Model Aeronautics. And today we're going to be talking some details with Chris Gleason. Excited to have you on board, man. Really excited to have this conversation. And I mean, I know I've got lots of questions. I'm hoping we get some from other people as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, if you have a second, give us a little bit of your bio. You know, how'd you get into jets? You know, where'd you get your start in model aviation?
Yeah, so since I was a young kid, I've always been interested in airplanes. So RC seemed like a natural way to go for a hobby for a young kid. So I started kind of how everybody does, just a small foam Cessna little airplane. Crashed it a bunch of times trying to learn how to fly it. Got really good at learning how to repair it, and you know, got taught a lot from some people I was fortunate enough to see early on in the hobby, how to improve the skill. And so I've been flying jets. This is coming into the 6th year now that I'm flying in turbines, and so it's been a lot of fun. And you know, it goes right along with my my full-time job as a full-scale pilot. So I get a double dose of airplane, so I'm happy guy.
Well, I'm glad you're not getting sick of it, because it's an awesome hobby to have. I would guess you get to fly stuff that you could only dream of doing in full scale aviation through this RC stuff. And I hear that a lot from pilots, that they just get excited about being able to, like, you know, there's no chance that I, as a private pilot, could go fly an F-14. You know, but hey,
yeah,
model aviation,
absolutely.
there it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. So we're here to talk about some of the scale details, and of course, a shout out to the people who are joining us in the live stream. You know, if you have questions, feel free to throw those in. You know, Chris is more than excited to answer some of those as they come up, if you have any specific questions. But you know, a lot of what I've seen you doing, Chris, is a lot of custom ordnance, a lot of those scale details to take something that you would order straight from the factory or build yourself and make it just that extra level, I guess, bring it to the next level or several levels. Talk about that a little bit. Like, what process do you use to really get those details in there?
Well, when it comes to ordnance, everybody likes seeing some things hanging out on the airplanes. But for me, being in the scale detail, I tend to want to focus more on the realism. So I have a few books that are used quite frequently for a lot of the scale guys to get the details right. And some of these books, they break down the specific ordnance that these airplanes take. They break down the detail that these ordnance have.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do is I take what I see in the books and I transcribe them into real detail. So for my own ordnance, I end up 3D printing a base model, and I'll take paint and experiment with different colors till I get the right shade of paint. Using a bunch of decals that either are custom made by myself or that can be purchased from one of many manufacturers.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to really bring to life the ordnance, and it brings a whole different level of detail to the airplanes.
So for a 3D printer, like, what kind of printing are you doing? What kind of plastics are you using?
The 3D printer, I'm just using a simple PLA. It's a common PLA, and when I'm printing just normal ordnance, a lot of the detail stuff that you're going to add, it depends on, are you going to drop the ordnance? Are they for static display only? Are they actually going to be flying on the airplane? Those have different impacts on how you manufacture the ordnance. So some of them may be very light and may be almost hollow. and those are more likely for display purpose only. And then there are others that have some more infill, we call it, which is a little bit more to it, so that if they fly on the airplane, they're stable and they're not too heavy. And then you go a little bit further and you can create nearly a solid piece of ordnance if you plan on dropping it, so that it's durable and you can reuse the ordnance if you need to.
Oh, that's cool. So how do you get rid of the ridges on those 3D prints? I mean, obviously the resolution can get pretty high. You don't have so many, but do you use a product, or do you just do a lot of sanding, or what do you end up doing?
Yeah, a lot of times it's just really sanding. The way the 3D printer works is you're able to, and I'll show you an example I have here. I just recently printed a brand new GBU 12,
Hmm.
and I printed it all in black, but it does come out with ridges and imperfections, and you can see that I've already sort of sanded the surface to get rid of those ridges.
Hmm.
And it's just a simple coarse grit sandpaper to start, get off the big ridges and such like that. And then you slowly work your way into more of the finer sandpaper to get that real smooth finish. And then you're looking at priming it at that point so that you can add the correct colors.
Cool. And so are you using like rattle cans to do the priming? Are you using airbrushes, or what?
You know, most of the time I found that I can make the colors with the rattle cans, and they're relatively inexpensive and pretty easy to get.
Mhm.
Any Lowe's or Home Depot, you can use anything from Rust-Oleum to any kind of an automotive paint, anything like that is sufficient. Same goes with the primers, and it's just important to remember that depending on what the ordnance is made out of, some guys will mold fiberglass ordnance, some guys will 3D print. So the plastic or the fiberglass may hold paint in a different way. So
Mhm.
make sure that whatever paint you're getting is suitable for the material that it's made out of.
Cool. That's really neat. So I've seen, I think you posted a video maybe last week sometime where you were showing a drop mechanism that dropped, in a scale sequence, one, two, three. So talk me through that process a little bit. Like I'm assuming you're watching videos to kind of see, how these things actually perform, and then just emulating that, or what's the process?
Yeah. So when I'm taking on a custom kind of project, the first thing that I think about is the end result. What do I want it to do when it's all done? And so you break down the problem, if you will. It's sort of like an equation in a math problem, but you're breaking down the problem into several different parts. You're breaking it down to materials that you're going to need, actions that the materials are going to need to take, and then how do the materials interact with one another. So for the ordnance system, and I actually have the F-16 out here, so you can see here the triple ejector rack
Hmm.
that has the drop mechanisms that I added to it. Um, I look into one of those detail books that I showed you and talked about, and you can see how the ejector rack is made, and you can see how and where the ordnance are placed on the rack. And so, taking that kind of information, um, I'm able to look at the ordnance as they are on the airplane, and does that match the picture that I see in all of my references?
Hmm.
And if it doesn't, then I can make some modifications. I can make some changes. But overall, if I remove the rack itself, you can see that the rack is relatively simplistic in its build. It's really not 100% um, solid, and in real life, it isn't either. But I've been able to take three E-flight payload release mechanisms and simply just shave a little bit of the plastic off of the 3D mold, and then just add them as they would be on the full scale bird. So in doing that, it's been able to create that kind of mechanism that's now droppable.
That's so cool. That's really cool, man. So getting away from the ordnance to a little bit of a degree, when you look at the overall aircraft, because that thing's gorgeous, just sitting on the bench. I can only imagine it in the air. But when you're looking at this and you get something in, what's the first thing you think about doing, like to make the biggest first impression? Because, like for me, I don't have a 3D printer. I could source one, but what is it that someone coming into this trying to get their model a little bit different than the other guy who may have bought the same plane on the flight line? Where would you go for a quick and easy sort of a make it your own and customize it?
My way of thinking of eye-catching details is if you were walking on the flight line and you saw your own airplane on the flight line, what would be the first thing that you see? What would be the first thing you look at? And it's highly variable between the different types of airplanes that you have. For example, behind me you see the F-18. Okay. So behind me, I have the F-18 on the stand here. The first thing that you're going to see is the paint. It's blue. It's vibrant. It's really easy and eye-catching for an airplane. And it's not a scheme that you ordinarily see. So when you see it, it catches your eye. At the same time, this is the 6th F-16. It's two-tone gray. It doesn't have an eye-popping paint job. So what does your eye go to first? It'll go to the yellow tips on the triple ejector rack, and it most likely will go to the smaller stuff like the tags. So the remove before flight tags are bright red. Okay, so if you want to enhance your model, think about looking at your model yourself on the flight line. Where would your eye go first? And those are the details that you want to add first. And it can be very, very small that makes a very big difference. So I get a lot of comments about the remove before flight tags and all of the, where did you get those? They're bright red. They wave in the wind. So when it's on a static display,
You got that motion, you've got that energy.
People are paying attention. Right.
Yeah, that's cool.
So,
Well, and I also noticed like some of the ladders that you have next to them, some of the entry points for the aircraft, like those details that, really do draw your eye, as a static display. That's really cool, man. So what about like weathering techniques and whatnot? Like, what's your go-to for weathering? Do you put a lot of time into kind of dry brushing and that sort of thing, or?
It depends also on the kind of weathering and what you're weathering. So dry brushing can be effective for something concentrated or in a small area, because to dry brush an entire airplane is very time consuming. And so I know a lot of guys, they will do that because it is able for more accurate detailing of each individual rivet or each individual panel line that they're trying to accentuate. But I actually have a friend of mine, Greg Alderman, that showed me a technique that he uses. And what he does is he takes this black turtle wax polish, and he puts it into a container, and then he'll just take a standard, I use a sponge, but any kind of application tool that's kind of squishy. I've used some pieces of harder foam with a little bit of duct tape so you can handle it. Definitely wear gloves because it's a messy process. So but you take a small amount of that polish and then you apply it to a small part of the airplane. And rather than let it dry, which a lot of dry brushing and stuff like that, it involves waiting for the material to set, trying to time it just right, get the shade just right. All you do is you take a little bit of Windex and you spray it on to paper towels, and imagine the airflow over the surface that you're weathering, and you wipe the surface in the direction of the airflow. And you'll notice that as you wipe more and more of the polish comes off of the airplane, and it dulls out that weathering. So if you want some really heavy weathering, maybe some kind of an exhaust stream or some kind of a heavily used part of the airplane, you might maybe wipe it once or twice max and then leave it alone. If you want to do something like I have the A10 up here. If you want to do something like the top of a wing, um, you may not want to have that really dark finish, and that's a mistake that a lot of people will make when they weather airplanes, is they think that the dirtier the better, and the dirtier the more realistic. And in reality, that's not the case. They try to keep the airplanes relatively clean,
Mhm.
but a lot of these airplanes are warplanes, and you can't clean them after every mission. So they're going to have some residual dirt on them. But if you are using a polish and you wipe away too much, you're just back to where you started, and all you have to do is reapply. If
Mhm.
you put on some polish and it gets into an area you didn't want it in, it's just as easy to take that Windex and wipe it right back off, and you're able to start again. So this technique I
Sounds
really
really
like,
forgiving.
because it is, and that's why I like it, because you can also experiment with techniques of the airflow, like I'm saying, simulating the airflow. I'll show you some of the rivets on the A10. If you see real closely, they have these streaks off the backside of the rivets, which is what you would get in panel lines and rivets on the real airplane. But if you do a part of an airplane and you're like, nah, that doesn't look good, or it's got swirls in it, or I touched it with my hand or something like that, I can see my fingerprints. All you do is just wipe it off and you start again.
That's
So
cool.
it is very forgiving, and it's very nice to be able to just get it how you want it, because it is your airplane and you're making it your airplane.
Yeah, I think that's the coolest part of it is you're making it your own. It's not a cookie cutter anymore. And when I
Yeah.
see like you zoom into those rivets, like to see like it's detail on detail on detail. It's thinking about hey, if this is a plane that I'm walking up to in reality, what are the details I'm going to see as I get closer, as I get closer. So that's a really cool perspective, and how you go about like working on this stuff. That's really neat, man.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah, it's a multi-step process for sure. Detailing any airplane is a multi-step process. It is easy to just stick a red tag, on a probe or on the end of a needle, or anything like that. Um, but if you're really looking for that realism, that awe, then you have to go a step further, and you
mhm.
have to be willing to um, put a little bit of thought, maybe get creative every once in a while. Um, I'll show you an example of getting creative.
All right.
When I first got the A10, I made a couple of triple ejector racks that were not usable. They were just to carry under the airplane,
Mhm.
and I had some stock Mark 82 bombs that I wanted to change the nose of the bomb to be a little different than what it was. And so instead of a rounded, kind of a conventional rounded bomb nose, I actually created these,
Oh, that's cool.
and they're actually meant to be. They're simulating the fuse, and the wire here is actually attached to the release in the back. And in real life, when they drop these off of the TER, it pulls the fuse out of the nose cone,
And
and that
arms it.
and that arms the bomb.
Mhm.
So I tried to think, well, how can I create something like this? Because nobody fabricates anything like that. So if you want to do it, you have to get creative. Well, this is just a simple wheel collar, this front part right here, that you would put on a regular small, foam airplane. This right here is actually a small differential gear you put on an RC car. And then
That's awesome.
behind that is just a larger wheel collar that's cut in half, and
So
I
is that
put
you? Is that you
three
like
of them.
laying awake at night at 2 in the morning and thinking, "How do I do that? How do I do that?" Is that how that hits, or?
Yeah, every once in a while, like I said, you have to think outside the box to
Mhm.
get what you want. And so, there'll be times, I know my local hobby shop owner very, very well, because I'll bring in a couple of pictures and say, I got to do this. We got to find some parts that we can, rig up, and we get this as the result. And so you'll sit there and stare at a wall of RC car parts. Even though you're in airplanes, you're looking at car parts
That
because
looks
those
similar.
have the
That looks similar.
shapes.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
cool. Chris asked, ordnance is usually not very well finished. There are scratches and dings all over the place. Do you finish yours off in the same manner? I guess it'd be considered weathering as well.
Well, it depends. So there are conventional ordnance, and then there are precision and we'll say unusable, if you will, ordnance. A lot of the ordnance that they go out for training missions on, those are called inert ordnance, and you'll see them. They're denoted with blue lines, and they may even say inert on them. Those have a tendency to stay on the airplane longer, and they also have a tendency to change airplanes because they're reusable.
Mhm.
So on those kind of ordnance, yeah, you could definitely weather them because in real life they would look dirty. Okay. Um, Other ordnance that may not be used frequently, so sidewinder missiles, AMRAAMs, sparrows, anything that the airplane might go out with all the time and may come back with all the time, you can definitely weather those.
Mhm.
But there are other things like the Mark 82s, okay, what I just showed you on these triple ejectors. Usually, if you carry Mark 82s,
You're
you're going to
dropping them.
drop Mark 82s, okay? And a lot of times, if you look in some pictures, and this is what I did with this, this is actually a Mark 82 that I just finished. It's got a snake eye tail, they call it. But what I did is I actually, you can see I left it a little bit more coarse and I
Mhm.
left it, it looks a little bit rougher. And what you'll notice that if you look in some of the ordnance pictures for the airplanes, they look very rough. They almost look like that old popcorn ceiling type of material.
Mhm.
And a lot of the decals and the writing on them is either faded or partially missing. And you can definitely tell that it's been moved around, it's been, bumped into, and as a result, it shows kind of haggard and it doesn't show perfect like you would, maybe think, well, if it's hanging on my airplane, it's got to look brand new. Well, that's not necessarily the case, and you'll see some of the best weathering in the world for guys who compete in world competitions, where they will willingly scrape off parts of their airplane paint because in the real world, that's how they looked.
To get
They were
worn
work
and
planes.
chipped and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're also considering what type of airplane you have. So something like an A-10 or something, like an F-16 that's going to go to war and they're going to be dirty and they're going to be used quite often. Yeah, you can weather them a little bit heavier. But then you look at something like this F-16, which is the demo scheme. Okay, that's the Dark Falcon. That's always very clean. It's used as just a demo plane, not a warplane. So you may not weather that at all. You may
Mhm.
just weather it a little bit, or maybe just weather the parts that are used all the time. So maybe the landing gear, the struts, maybe a little bit over the edge of the cockpit. So it's really, you really have to think about what you want your airplane to look like in the end.
And once again, that's going back to those books and those scale details that are held within, right?
A lot of scale detailing, especially the more precision scale detailing, it involves a lot of research, and it involves a lot of reference that you can go to virtually anywhere online. You can type in whatever really you want to,
Mhm.
and it'll spit out all kinds of answers, and you
Yeah.
have an array of options to choose from.
What about looking at real world examples, like going to the museums and some of those displays? Does that get you anything, or is it not as effective because they're not in use anymore? So they may have been polished, may have been cleaned up.
Yeah, I mean, museums definitely hold valuable pieces, especially for things like nomenclature, stuff that marks doors and access panels and such, that are not removed, even if the aircraft is removed from service.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of times I've found if you go online and you Google the type of airplane that you have, so an F-16 or an A-10, and then you have called a walk around. There's a lot of people that do go to air shows and they go to museums and they go to displays, and they will literally walk around that particular airplane and they will take pictures of every single part of the airplane. And then they'll post on the website all of these pictures so that if you ever had a question of what does the main landing gear look like on an F-16, there'll be pictures and you'll see brake lines, hydraulic lines, disc brakes, everything. And
That's cool.
so you're able to access that kind of information as well.
So Danny C threw out a question. Any tips for weathering, painting the newer types of ARF covering materials?
Well, covering materials, something like monocoat or an ultra coat, something that has a very smooth surface, tends to be very hard for the weathering to adhere to. And often you'll find guys will weather it and they'll use the same technique that they would on a rougher surface, and then they touch it and it's gets on their hands, it comes off the airplane, it leaves fingerprints all over. So on a particular covering, I would recommend roughing it up a little bit. Give it a little bit of texture so that when you are using a weathering technique, and there's a bunch of techniques out there. I know guys that get a little bit of dry shoe polish. They put a little water in it, and they put a paintbrush on it, and they weather it, little by little over the wing. Other guys will use makeup, um, if they can steal it from their wives or their girlfriends. They'll take the makeup and they'll use a mascara or something like that to highlight specific details. So giving it texture will allow that material, regardless of what you're using, some surface to adhere to. Very similarly to if you were going to use CA glue on a repair or on something. If you rough up that surface a little bit, it gives the CA something to grab onto.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Well, we're coming up close to a half hour here. I'm going to put a last call out for those that are watching at home. Throw out your questions. We'd love to hear them. This has been really informative for me, Chris. So I appreciate your time going through this stuff with us. Seeing the level of detail that you can pull out of these planes and add to them, it's really cool. And I, for one, look forward to seeing you on the flight line soon, man.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and this is why we do this. This is why we do this hobby, because we have the ability to make the airplanes our own. We have the ability to do whatever we want, even if it's not necessarily scale. If you want to put a giant missile on a Cessna, you can do that. It's what makes you happy, and it allows you to enjoy the hobby, and that's why we all do it in the end.
Yeah.
To have that fun. So for me, it's fun. It's always fun. It's never work, and it's fun to think outside the box, and it's always great to head to the flight line and to see the reactions of people looking at the static displays, and to be talking and answering all kinds of questions about fabrication, speeds, altitudes, things like that. It's all part of the hobby, but I love it. So
that's all. Well, you can tell that you love it and you're doing a great job at it. So thanks for coming in. Thanks for everybody that's watching at home. Having a good time here, sharing some knowledge, sharing a cool dude here, and happy to do it. If you liked this video, of course, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. We'll keep an eye on these comments as they come through over the next few days as well. So if you have a question and you're not watching it live, that's okay. Throw the question in there. I'm sure, Chris, you'll be observing. I'll observe as well. We'll do our best to make sure those questions are answered. Of course, if you're not already a member of the AMA, I would highly encourage you to do so. It's a great community with a lot of awesome people that are ready and willing to come alongside of you and help you with whatever endeavors you might have in model aviation. So can't speak highly enough for the organization. And I look forward to seeing you all at the flying field. And with that, I think we'll say goodbye. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all very much.